When it comes to access to education and employment, people shouldn't have to go it alone. Yet that is the reality for countless parent advocates and disabled individuals around the world. They can't find the help they need, so they have to carve a path of their own. That is my story, and that is also the story of our guest, Marie Martin, an autism advocate and warrior mom in the UK, who is breaking down barriers to increase job opportunities for autistic individuals like her son. In this episode, we're going to talk to her about breaking barriers and making allies with organizational leaders to increase autism inclusion and access to meaningful opportunities that change lives. Hi, I'm Dr. Theresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited for you to join me today as I talk to our special guest, Marie Martin, who after 20 years in the telecommunications industry became a full-time carer, educator, and an advocate for her autistic son, Zach. And through her experiences, she has opened up channels based on his special interests within construction, highways, and the power industries. And I'm really excited because she's here to talk to us today about the important role we all play as allies as part of the autistic community. And so how together we can all actively create these new pathways to job opportunities and learning opportunities and really support the life success of these individuals. So welcome, Marie. I am just delighted to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you, me too. Thank you very much for asking. I'm extremely honored.
And I really want to start today with you sharing your personal journey and how it shaped your perspective on autism inclusion, especially as we start thinking about inclusion in the workplace.
Gosh, where do I start? I guess I started from a place of no hope, really. My son didn't fit anywhere. He'd got to a stage within education that he just couldn't cope with life. He didn't want to be there. He was bored. It didn't stimulate him. Due to his diagnosis, he just really couldn't. He wasn't interested in anything that school had to offer. And he hit a very dark place, and he confided in me that he just didn't want to be here anymore if that was the route that he was going to be forced to be taken down. Obviously, that's horrific for any parent to hear. And I had to very, very quickly think outside the square about what was available, what I could do to, at the bare minimum, stabilise his mental health. I mean, it was just absolutely horrific. And I was racking my brains and thinking, how do I go about home educating him? Am I even able to home educate him? What's available out there in terms of support? Because whilst he was in the education system, over here we have something called an educational health and care plan. And that was my route, or my little Bible, to getting the support and the funding for Zach to be able to get his education. And obviously he was 15 by this stage, so he's coming up to quite a crucial time. But it was just getting worse and worse. So I had to think outside the square. I came up with the idea of a personal educational budget, which I'd researched, which nobody bothered to tell me about. I didn't even know it existed. And I looked at that and I was thinking, for the first 12 months, maybe we just have a therapeutic approach, take the pressure off, stop the anxiety, lessen the anxiety, stop the panic attacks, because it had gotten really quite bad by this stage, to the degree that I didn't know which way to turn, because this was all a steep learning curve for me. So sort of fast forwarding into how I managed to make the changes, I was thinking, well, he's coming up to the age where he's starting to need sort of, where is he going to go in life? Where does he fit in regarding his special interests? And I remembered that we'd done a talk with a company called Costain, when Zach was about 8 years old, and one of the career days that they do in junior school. And he wasn't actually due to go to that. So again, I think this is important that I mention this, because had I not pushed the boundaries when he was 8 years old, when the junior school didn't want to take him to this careers day because they felt that they wouldn't be able to handle his behaviour or what, for whatever reason. And I said, well, can I come and support him? Because he'll behave, he'll be great. I'll support him and he'll be able to access it. They agreed. Zach asked a question for the civil engineering company, who happened to be Costain, who was doing the presentation. And they couldn't answer the question. I mean, the question was something like, why is the footing different on the M1 motorway at junction 30 or whatever it was? Why is it different to the other junctions? They kind of looked a bit confused and said, I don't think it is. And Zach was adamant that it was. Let's, during the lunch hour, you come and show me. So anyway, he proceeded at 8 years old to get Google Earth up and show them what he meant. And they said, we don't know, we haven't really got an answer. I've since found out that was Richard Paddy's first day, who's supported us ever since. What they did do is agree to write to him. So they sent me a wonderful email a couple of weeks later explaining exactly why it was different, and opened up Zach an open-ended visit. Come and see us. We're not far from where you live at the moment. Come and have a look around the workshops. You're very welcome anytime. I gave that to various different settings that Zach was in, whether it was junior school, the special unit he visited and didn't fit in, who couldn't meet his needs, who's in an independent school, government funded, that didn't meet his needs, and nobody bothered to take him. And I thought, perhaps this might be my key to giving something for Zach to look forward to, something positive. So I literally trolled my email box, because 5 years have gone on since then, and researched and tried to find out the names of these two people, because obviously my memory's not photographic like Zach's. And I found out that the Costain head office was at Maidenhead, and I literally found a number for them, rang the main reception and just said, can you tell me if Richard Paddy and Chris Hyde still work there? Yes, of course, I'll just pop you through to his mobile, which was a complete shock to me. I was completely and utterly unprepared. So I proceeded to leave this message on the voicemail. Can you please help? It was just a plea for help, really. I don't know whether you can remember a child called Zach a few years ago. He asked you a difficult question. I didn't even know whether they'd remember us, but it was I just felt like I got to do something. And then I think it was the very next day I had a phone call. How on earth could we forget Zach? He's amazing. He's fantastic. You're not going to forget a child who's got that level of knowledge and inquisitiveness regarding civil engineering at 8 years old. Give me a couple of days and we'll see what we can do. And sure enough, a couple of days later, I had a phone call asking me all about Zach and what had happened, explained to them the current situation, about him being in the dark place. Yes, we'd absolutely love to help. And they set up the most amazing VIP day, which in itself was fantastic. And we thought that was going to be a one-off session, really. I just thought that I'd asked for a favour, they'd given me the favour, and that might be the end of it. But during the visit, Zach impressed them so much. So it really, looking back, it was a case of getting him in front of the right people to be able to showcase his knowledge and his special interest. And they couldn't quite believe what he was talking about, really. The power, the knowledge, the depth of his knowledge was outstanding. And I think from looking back from that very first meeting, it was meeting the right people. Richard Paddy was absolutely the person to meet. We met a guy called Stuart Atkin who helped drive the situation. So I think it's finding the right company and it's finding the right people within that organisation that understand, that get it, that want to make that difference and that want to help you drive that change to be able to break down some barriers and open up opportunities. And then sure enough, about a fortnight later, we had another phone call completely out of the blue from Stuart Atkin, who said, I'm sat here on this training course doing this virtual reality cherry picking thing. I'm useless with computers and driving it. And I've just turned around to Danielle and said, you know who we need here, don't we? We need Zach. So they rang me and Stuart said, can you get down here? I said, when? And he said, now. And I was like, okay. And because I was home educating and because I got that flexibility, we literally brushed our teeth and off we went, hopped in the car and it just kind of, that's where it all really, really started. And then it's just a case of, you think it's a one-off, it's not, looking for the next opportunity. And obviously my background of telecommunications within the last 20 years gives me that grounding to look for opportunities and to capitalise on opportunities and to create opportunities and thinking outside the box and everything else that you have to do when you've got a child like I've got who's very different and doesn't appear to fit in anything the standard educational system. So yeah, that's how it all started.
And that's an amazing story. And what I love about your story is it really started with you as the first advocate. And that's where I think you and I connect as the lived experience mom advocates that saw potential in our sons. Although I know there's plenty of mom advocates that see the potential in their daughters and that the system isn't working. And we're like, you took steps, and I know I did too, that the system wasn't working. So we were going to find a way to make the system work for us, right? Or to work around the system. And then what I really love is there's this sense of bravery because you were surprised that they entertained the idea, but you were also brave enough to make the phone call, right? Like, what was there to lose? You made the phone call, and the worst thing they would have said is, I don't remember, or I'm not going to do that. And I know that on my journey, it's quite similar. There were times where it's like, if he only had an opportunity, people would be so amazed. Of course, they would want him to be part of this. And then you think, well, maybe it's just me because I'm the mom. I see things differently. And then you and I have these conversations with people. They meet our sons. And it's like really getting that first meeting, because as soon as they meet them, there's like this moment where it turns and they're like, well, why wouldn't we want your son? And then that brings us to like what you and I know, that if our sons were the ones knocking at the door, would they have ever gotten in?
No, absolutely not. And I have these conversations all of the time with whatever company, because obviously now Richard has helped us grow this into different companies. He's introduced us to his contacts, who've then introduced us into their contacts, who've then reached out to the companies that they know, who all want to help. But yeah, you're completely right. It all starts with you being that parent advocate. But yeah, I've also questioned myself like you did, thinking, is it just me? Is he as special as I think he is? Because actually, the language that Zach speaks is something that I can't understand. His brain is far superior to mine. I've just got the experience of being able to look for an opportunity and capitalise on it. But I didn't know whether at this stage Zach was speaking sense about these managed type motorways these electricity towers. But the minute I put him in front of people, and I'm talking people who sat there with doctorates, in electrical engineering, people who've been there for 30 years. And, I'm there. I've got this, he's nearly 20 now, so he's 19 at the moment. But he's able to challenge these doctorates and make them, people with doctorates, and make them think about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And he's his own advocate but only when it revolves around his special interests. He wouldn't be able to open up the doors. He needs that bridge. He needs me as that bridge to be able to support him. And I know we've discussed this before. And it was when I first chatted to you, I'll be honest, it was like speaking to an old friend who I'd known for a very long time, not somebody who's at the other side of the world, who I'd never even met. But I think it's just so nice to meet someone else who feels it. And I always say the best professionals are the ones with lived experience, and I can pick them out. In the times that I've dealt with people, I can pick them out, and I'll usually say, have you got a child or you've got a close relative who's autistic or whatever? And, they're probably not allowed to even answer me out of professionalism or what have you sometimes, because they're here to support us, or should be. But you can just tell, because they get it. They can finish your sentences off. It's the same way of thinking. And it's that different way of thinking. And meeting you and reading and listening to your podcasts. I was doing my ironing the other day, and I think I listened to either 3 or 4 back to back, and I had a lot of ironing. But it was just amazing, because I was thinking, your vision is exactly the same as mine. The answers that I would come up with are exactly the same. But the only difference is I haven't got the doctorate, unfortunately.
But it's good that we're seeing things in alignment, because it also shows that there is a pattern to success. It'd be one thing if it was my pattern or your pattern, but the fact that we're finding similar supports are bringing the intended outcomes, we know that then we can scale this. One of the things that I think is challenging is that there are parents that are like, but I don't know what to do. Or there's businesses that are like, I don't know how to advocate. And I want to kind of talk to you about this, Marie. And one of the things that I think is challenging, and we've already touched on it, is it seems like our sons, and we are having success because we're a little extroverted. We're definitely assertive women, and we will not take no for an answer. And we see potential, and we're going to push, and we're going to fight for it. We have either the time or the resources or the drive, whichever, or all three, that we are making that happen. But not all parents have the resources. Not all the parents have the know-how. And what our stories are telling folks is that as a parent, you either need to be or find an advocate for your child to start busting down doorways. And then on the flip side, and this is the part that I'm always looking to solve for, is that if leaders just had an opportunity to meet these amazing individuals, if there was a pathway in, we wouldn't have to knock on the door so hard. So you talked about how you're working with these companies that are like, they've met Zach, I'm sure they've met others now, they're starting to get it. Do you see any change on their side where they may be starting to create an easier door so that they don't have to have so many parent advocates pounding on it? And that kind of leads us to what that would become real allyship, where other people start opening those doors instead of us having to knock them down.
Yeah, I do see a change. It's probably not enough. And I do see a mix of reactions from companies. I see companies who think they've got it right, but actually, when I look a bit deeper, they haven't really got it right. They're just literally scratching the surface. I see companies who want to get it right and know that they're great on mental health and suicide, but actually they're sadly lacking on invisible disabilities. And they don't really understand that, and they're not quite sure where to go to improve things, to take things forward. And, the best ones are the ones who actually reach out, and they're few and far between, I have to say. There's an awful lot of box ticking exercises taking place, which, needs to change really, because there needs to be some purpose behind what these companies are doing. So I think it's all new for them. Everything's quite new for these companies. So they've kind of met Zach. They're not used to somebody who's so highbrow with his abilities and his knowledge. So I think, there's companies that go into sort of special schools and do support, in that respect. But it's making that transition into real employment opportunities. I had a conversation last week with Joanna Hitchen at Costain. She's their EDI lead. She's fantastic. I've known Jo for several years. And I don't think Zach's been ready for any sort of transition or any employment opportunities. But he's getting older and he's settling an awful lot more. And I think there still needs to be an awful lot done to be able to make that happen. But what I loved about Joanna was she was asking me, do you think that this would work for Zach? Do you think, she doesn't automatically cut me out of the equation. She listens to both of us. And, she's saying to me, well, perhaps, I mentioned that I'd listened to your podcasts about having somebody to advocate. But she was very, very interested. She was taking on board everything that I was saying as regarding, it's great to put a mentor with somebody like Zach, but actually they'd still have to understand autism and pathological demand avoidance well, because, and that's where the complications come in, I guess, is having somebody who understands that well enough, or they're prepared to put somebody in and train them, or at the very least have a few sessions with somebody like myself who can tell them exactly what to avoid. But it's quite tricky because it's individual. They do say when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And I think, the flexible working, we also touched on that. And the fact that Zach's most productive in the night. He likes it when it's quiet and when it's dark. He likes it when everybody else is asleep. That's when he gets the real power for his visions and his ideas, and is able to put them down on paper. So, there's got to be an awful lot of flexibility around the whole situation, really. And it's finding the right companies and the right people, again, the companies who are prepared to listen and learn, and the ones who can see the value in what our fantastic children bring, because you don't get that sort of power from a neurotypical brain. It just doesn't happen. I've got a child who can sit and converse with people who've got 30 years worth of experience, and it's been said that he's probably got more knowledge than even they have, and that's just his hobby. He's not had an introduction to any official material. It's just stuff that he's found out, because he's got a very inquiring brain. So there's lots and lots to do, and there's an awful lot that they just need to listen, really. I think that's the biggest thing. Listen and take things on an individual basis, and listen to people who know them well, because I think with companies here, they're still of the opinion that, or most are still of the opinion that they can still fit in, and it's just kind of changing the interviewing technique or whatever to get them through the interview. But it's so much more than that. And I think it needs maybe a whole different approach.
And I'm glad you said that, because I mean, corporation, especially when we think about large companies and the power companies you're working with and the companies I work with, they're always looking for a system, because it's not a company of 5 or 10 people. They've got thousands of people. They need consistency. They need rules. And so when we start presenting something that is counter to everything they do, everything in terms of how they operate, it would be natural to have resistance. And then the other piece that I think is a bit of a hurdle, but we will get over it. I am confident, Marie, because we are many of us chopping at this. But when people meet your son, Zach, my son, Braden, there's a little bit of they're exceptional, and they are exceptional, but there's a bit of, I will do this for them because I've never met a person like this, not knowing that there are all these blockers, that there were probably many, many young adults like our boys that could bring so much value, but how they operate is so different. And, you were talking about the concept of having a personal advocate. And for both of us, that's why our sons are thriving, because we as parents are able to talk to the professors or talk to the business leaders, and we have relationships with them that have nothing to do about getting the work done. You and I both have talked about, you don't understand Zach's electrical engineering background. I do not understand my son's mathematical skills and the things he's talking about when it comes to calculus and all these different types of linear equations. And they are there to do the work, and people want them to do the work, but it's getting them wrapped around how we treat most employees like cogs. Like, you come into the office, you sit at this desk, you do it from 8 to 5 your local time, and you go home. And that is the part that doesn't work for us, even though many autistic people could probably do the work as well, if not better, with their hyper focus and extreme intelligence in those areas, if we could just obliterate the standard, this is how we work, right? Like, what if they sent Zach the schematics and he could just work on them overnight? And then the bigger question is, why not? And I think that's the part where you and I have had the opportunity to say that to specific people. And then they're like, that's a great question. I could totally make that accommodation for them. But it does seem like there's this little hurdle that our boys really need it. But I think other humans would thrive too if they could really approach work in ways that made sense with the work, not what makes sense with like controlling people in your company. And so when I kind of shift our focus back to those organizational leaders, like, we need them to like really start taking some steps to make change. If you could get organizational leaders to just do 1 or 2 things, what would you ask them to do?
Maybe to, most importantly, to decide, if they see the value in our children and young people, then they've got to get completely and totally behind it. And they've got to reach out. They've got to speak to people with invisible disabilities. They've got to speak to parents, and really put some resource into that. And because you're right. What you're saying is it's going to make things so much better for the whole team. It's not just our individual children that are going to benefit, because there has to be thousands of undiagnosed autistic people who are struggling, who maybe have time off with anxiety that they're unaware of. So I think it's that understanding and those reasonable adjustments, and looking at things from an individualistic point of view, as opposed to just having a heading, well, we make reasonable adjustments, or you call them reasonable accommodations. But what does that mean? Because it needs to go one stage further than that. And and being able to, again, think outside that box. It's all about thinking outside that box, because at the minute, the majority of companies like to do things a certain way. I think COVID's probably helped because it's made them realise that they can work remotely. But it's trusting people as well to be able to get that job done. The one difference I will say for if you're to employ my son is the fact that I know he's not going to get fed up 6 months later or 12 months later or 2 years later after they've poured resource into him, because it's been his passion since he's been 3 years old with electricity towers and 8 years old with, gantries and motorways. So he's nearly 20 now. That's not going to change. But so the resource isn't wasted. And I think maybe the attitude needs to change to be able to go out and source these children, source these young people, because there's got to be lots of them. I know there's lots of them because I hear from them on my Twitter sessions all the time, from mums the ones that don't really know quite what to do with them, the teachers, the educators who reach out to me, who say, this child's different, they're not like the usual typical child with an additional need who's in my class. They're in a different place, and these are the children that I do believe have got these special qualities, and the reason they've got them makes them exactly who they are, and without them they wouldn't thrive, and just get them in, spend time with them, do these tester days. I mean, I watch people do these tester days all day, all the time, where they get them in from colleges and they do like a standard 4 days career sessions to tell them all about your company. Now, we were invited to one of those, actually, kindly invited, which was a really nice idea. And I kind of accepted, not knowing quite what it was going to be. I said, oh, that's lovely, thank you. And once I got the details, I had a look at it and I thought, Zach is going to be really bored here, because it's literally going to be a classroom full of people from a local college. You're going to talk about things in a very light way. That's not really any good for Zach. He would be bored, which would probably end up probably being disruptive because he was bored. But put him with his better placed somewhere where they've got, I don't know, lots of experience, who can really talk technical and solution based. He's not really interested in the basics of a company. He's just interested in the real meat on the bones. And then I had to say, oh, I'm really sorry. It's really kind of you, but I don't. So you're kind of not wanting to close those doors, but you've got to be frank, because actually, if you don't get that balance right, then he's going to go. He's not going to be able to showcase his talents. And I don't want to create a problem. I don't want to create negativity. And that maybe could. So you're always running that balance of placing them somewhere where they're going to thrive and to be able to showcase their skills, and sort of pulling back and guiding people. But you don't want to appear ungrateful, because, to be quite honest, anybody who offers Zach visits and work experience, I'm totally grateful of. And so is he.
And you lean on a really important part. And I think this is where parents get stuck, or advocates, because sometimes an autistic person will meet a professor or a teacher and they'll see their potential and have more of the voice and want to push and help them. So it doesn't just have to be parents, but it is really finding that person that gets it and is willing to be that voice. And I think you've even made some allies where they saw potential and they're calling you and saying, we want Zach. But then there's that flip side. And I think it's part of the education process where parents get fatigued, right? They were advocating for their kids in schools. They weren't getting what they need. They get labeled as a problem. And so then we start to flip on this job side, and there's going to be a hesitancy, right, to reach out to those companies. So what advice do you have for the parents and the advocates that are like, my son, my daughter has potential. They want to go to college. They want to get that first job. And they're tired. or they're afraid?
Oh, gosh. That's a really tough one. And again, on my Twitter, I come up against this all the time. And the only thing that I instill is that bad times don't last forever. Look for the positives, cling on to those positives. You can overcome that adversity. And you've just got to keep going. Don't give up, because your children are worth it. And we are their only voice. And don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely shattered sometimes. And, you know, I'm 56 years old. I've just done the night shift at Costain, where I was there on the M6 until close on 3 a.m, I think, by the time we got back to the hotel. Do I really want to stand on a motorway? No. Do I really want to talk electricity towers all the time? No. But I love my child, and I'm determined that that his talents are going to be used. And it's just, you've just got to literally keep going. There's several times when I thought we've come to an end, things have gone slightly quiet, and it's just keep providing opportunities. And again, I keep using that word, thinking outside the box, but we'd got an electricity tower going up 10 minutes away from us. It was freezing cold. It was in the middle of winter. And I said, how's that? Why don't you stand and almost do like a report on it? We'll use it for your Pylon Appreciation Society. And he did a video. It took a few takes, but he's a great editor on his PC. And we put the video together, and then I showcased it on LinkedIn. I tagged in the companies who he'd like to go and see. And again, we got someone reach out for us. When we go out on site, it's just capitalising on what's there. So choosing the special interests, capitalising on what's there. There are people who are there to support you, various advocates. There are other parent advocates. That's why I started the group that I run on a Friday morning, just to give people a voice and a little bit of support. Because I think it's important that if it gets a week on and you've had a rough week, and we all do, and I very often say you'll still find me when I'm overwhelmed and overloaded, I'll sit and have a good sob. But it's just a case of not being beat, really. It's just getting that fire inside you and just turning it into something productive, really. But I'm like that anyway, so that's just my personality. But I'd love to set up something where I can open these channels. So if there are any companies out there who want to help me do that, then I'd love to do that. I was speaking to Joanna about yourself, and I said, she's got this absolute amazing vision, and you do a lot worse than to speak to her. So, and I think there's so much that needs to be done. And, going back to your very first question, what needs to be done? And, how are you finding companies? There's lots that still need to be done. And even people who think they've got it right, actually, when you've got lived experience, and if they spoke to us and listened to this, they'd probably realise that they haven't quite got it right. And a different way of thinking may be better.
And that's just it. A different way of thinking will be better. So we know that as advocates, we're there. And we know that businesses need to start thinking a little bit differently about how they accommodate our children. And a lot of times I like to talk about other misconceptions and stereotypes about autism. But the more we talk, I think that our misconception is less about the autism and more about understanding the difference between a talent and a skill for a job versus communications and the ability to market and present yourself to get a job, when, if you think about it, are very different skill sets. And as standard in society, we have a very individualistic view where you, employee, have to market and communicate for yourself to demonstrate your skill in electrical engineering, which, by the way, would be completely different skill sets. And I know you've heard me talk about this before. And I don't think the barrier, I mean, I'm not saying misconceptions and stereotypes about autism and what it is and isn't one of our issues, but I think one of our hurdles is getting leaders to understand that like an employee doesn't have to be all things. You could have a conversation with me, Marie or Theresa, and a conversation, and we could be setting up the job site and we could be negotiating the actual job and then hand the work to the boys and the boys get the work done, which is what you are actually hiring for anyway. And so that's what I think about. Like when I think about people being better allies, I think what I need for them to do is to not start making judgments and misconceptions that me needing to represent my son in the contractual agreement, which, by the way, a big company would have their lawyers and accountants at a major contractual agreement too. How we get over that hurdle. And you and I know, like with your experiences with Richard and our experiences with others, once we introduce ourselves and they meet our sons, they get it. And then we're not a problem. They have no problem talking to us. And the work arrangement, is that what you're finding? Is that almost bigger than the autism hurdle?
Yes. Yeah. It's opening those doors. I mean, National Grid are a typical example because a contact tried to get Zach into National Grid. And it was, well, we only really do visits for friends and family. And this has happened on several occasions with different companies. And yet, once we'd visited, and we're there again this week, actually, tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday, we're going down to Somerset to their Hinkley Point project for 3 days with National Grid, and they've been brilliant. They're another Costain. But prior to that, we went to one of their sites at the Innovation Centre over at D-side. And just to watch Zach in action was absolutely incredible. And he was coming up with solutions. I think he said, oh, that's not going to work straight away. And this manager said, well, I hope so, because I've just given him, X amount of million to make sure that it does. And Zach just went into an automatic spiel of, well, you'd have to do this and you have to do that, and this wouldn't take the weight load. And, all these technical terms. And the guy who was actually cut, he said, and that's exactly the lengths that we're going to have to go to. And the manager just said, so we've just got a young person who's just walked in the room who's already thought of that. And yet I'm tasking people and it's taking X amount of months or whatever to come up with these solutions. And this guy's done it as a hobby, while I am just employing him. He sorted it out in whatever time. And that's okay. And you can do the visits. And that's what I like about LinkedIn. And that's what I like about some of the podcasts and these sorts of situations, because you can get to the people who need to listen. These podcasts and situations need to be forwarded to managing directors and, CEOs, operations directors, people who are making those changes, because we can sit in a meeting like that and that can happen. But the people who need to know about it to be able to make those changes might never get to hear about it. And they're the people who need to hear what we're saying in order to make those changes.
And you lead us to a great way to wrap up our conversation. And you've touched on it, but I'll let you drive it home. What do you want our listeners to know so that they can be better allies?
I need them to listen. I need them to share that same vision, really. And if they're not sure how to do it, to be able to reach out and learn, really. We're all learning together. But I think reach out to people who've got the lived experience and that vision, and to look at things, well, in your words, in a different way, with a fresh pair of eyes, look at things differently. And I think that's the key, because that's been my success story from start to finish. I've had to look at everything differently. When you're gifted with a child like I was, if I hadn't have looked at things differently, we would still be where we were. with the negative comments of when I first had him, he'll never amount to anything. Well, maybe if I hadn't have looked at things differently, maybe he might have been, I don't know. But I haven't let those limitations stop me. So you have got to keep going. And you will achieve. If I don't know how to fail. I simply don't know how to fail. If somebody turns around and tells me that is not possible, then I'll make sure it is. And that's just the way I am. It's my natural personality. I'm probably more like my son than I realise.
Love it. And I think your drive in the power of possibility is why he's thriving and why, of course, that we're talking today. Marie, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your journey with us. I think everyone listening would agree with me that we have got to have you back and explore more about the power of possibility and potentials. But for now, I just want to thank you for your dedication, your perseverance, because you were making a profound impact, not just on your son's life, but you were giving other parents vision and hope and resources, and now helping drive community leaders to have more skills and better resources and better approaches to help people like our sons. And you're really making some powerful, meaningful change. And I'm just grateful for your advocacy and really grateful that you joined us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I never set out to do this. It kind of happened by accident. But I absolutely feel so passionately towards the fact of making change, because I don't want anyone. Zach and I have really gone through the mill for the last 20 years. And it's time for change because it's not fair. It's not fair to inflict this on families and children and young people just because they're different. Because just because they're different, it doesn't mean they're less. And we need to embrace the difference. We all talk about it. We all read about it, but we all need to do it now, don't we?
I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank AudioWorks Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.